Hello, I am Tammy Marshall, the author of Trouble on Tybee, and today I'm going to read to you the very first chapter of it. I have already shared on here an introduction to the book and the prologue, and I can share a link for that in the comments after I finish the first chapter. This particular novel is my fifth book, and it is a suspense, and it is written in first person. So the main character is a woman named Stacy. So as I read it in the I, as first person, I am Stacy. So please join me for chapter 1 of Trouble on Tybee. Chapter 1, The Agent. I sifted the contents of the box around for the umpteenth time. I had made very little progress in deciding what to keep, what to sell, and what to toss. After peering into the correct box for another few minutes, I finally pulled out a carved wooden box containing an assortment of old, tarnished jewelry. Clearly, the entire assortment should be added to the small pile of what to toss that I'd managed to make so far. But I hesitated as I spied a gaudy necklace I remembered buying for Mother when I was a child. She'd worn it with pride until her neck turned green. I assumed she'd thrown it away herself years ago, but here it was, tangled amid other old jewelry in a box in her dimly lit attic. She'd cared enough to hang on to it, so perhaps I should too. I studied the necklace a moment longer, and then I closed the lid on the jewelry box, unable to decide the fate of the wooden box and its contents. I returned it to the larger box and pushed that away from me. I rose and worked a few kinks out of my back as I surveyed my progress. What little I'd accomplished in the time I'd been here was laughable. I'd been avoiding the inevitable much more than facing it, all while convincing myself I was making progress. I was good at that, always had been. Sighing, I sat back down on the floor, determined to make noticeable progress before leaving the attic this afternoon. As I pulled another box toward me, I heard my mother's landline phone ring in her office below me. Doubting I would be able to maneuver my stiff 52-year-old body down the narrow attic stairs in time to answer it, and wanting to stay true to my plan, I decided to let it ring itself out. After a fifth and then a sixth ring, I mumbled, "Don't you know the woman's dead?" After the seventh, I said, "That's one persistent telemarketer." Finally, after the ninth, I gave up, headed to the stairs, turned around, gripped the thin handrail, and started feeling my way down backwards. As my head cleared the attic floor, the peals of the phone became much shriller, and I grimaced. "Hold your damn horses, I'm coming." By now I was convinced that the caller was either my husband or my younger brother. They were two of a mere handful of people who even knew I was staying at my mother's house for a spell, and they certainly were the only people who'd give me this much time to reach the phone, knowing I was knee-deep in the sorting and packing phase that falls on the children or other family members when someone dies. My money was on my brother John, since he had abandoned this project to me shortly after Mother's small, rushed, pre-cremation visitation, so he could return to Chicago and his family. I'd been happy, albeit rather surprised, too, that his distant and cold wife, as well as his two spoiled and rowdy boys, hadn't come to Tybee Island to say their goodbyes. But I'd been a touch put out that John hadn't offered to stay longer to help me. Perhaps he felt guilty about that, and was now calling to check in on me. Funny, though, that he'd be calling me in mid-morning on a workday and on Mother's landline instead of on my cell phone. I was thinking this as I reached for the phone on the corner of Mother's large desk. I picked up the receiver and placed it against my ear as I carried the ancient black phone, its long cord trailing behind me, from her office and across the hallway to Mother's bedroom. Plopping down onto Mother's worn mattress, the bed springs groaning beneath me, I casually said, "Hello, John. No, I haven't yet found those baseball cards Dad promised you before he took off. Probably just another of the many lies he told us, you know." Then I sighed and blew a damp lock away from my sweaty brow. The line was silent. so I assumed that whoever had called must have hung up before I answered, or the caller was remaining mute on the other end, because it wasn't John after all. "Anyone there?" I asked, trying to sound glib instead of annoyed. A cough, as though the other party were clearing his throat, and then a tentative-sounding voice said something I couldn't quite make out. Another much louder throat-clearing cough. I pulled the receiver away from my ear until he was finished and replaced it as I heard him finally say, "Yes, is this Stacy, Sylvia's daughter?" "Yes, that's me. Who's asking, please?" "Well, this is Milton." I waited for him to provide more information, but he must have thought I should know who he was by his first name only. "Milton?" I repeated in a questioning fashion, attempting to prompt more information out of him. Suddenly, weary, I stretched out on the bed and pressed my cheek against the old quilt that had served as Mother's bedspread ever since she moved to Tybee Island. She'd cobbled together the quilt during her short-lived sewing phase over 40 years ago, when she was attempting to maintain a period of marital domesticity that didn't suit her or my father. They'd both bailed on John and me, each in their own ways. Even though the quilt was poorly sewn, it had survived all these years, and I assumed that Mother kept it because it contained pieces of John's and my baby clothes amid the odd assortment of fabrics that she'd selected for it. "Milton Francis, your mother's agent?" the elderly, phlegm-filled voice announced in my ear. I rolled over, twirling the receiver's cord around my finger. This was a reflexive throwback movement from my childhood. Nowhere else besides my mother's house could I still find or use a corded phone. I nodded in recognition now. "Oh, yes, Frank. She always called you Frank when she spoke about you. Sorry, I didn't recognize the name Milton." He cleared his throat again and chuckled. "Only my close friends call me Frank. I don't have too many of those left. One fewer now that Sylvia's gone." He paused, and I heard him honking into a handkerchief. For someone who'd certainly spent years making book deals over the phone, Milton seemingly had no phone etiquette. His agency had sent the largest flower arrangement to Mother's viewing, so I knew full well that Milton was aware that his client had died. I couldn't imagine why he'd be calling or even who he had expected to answer. I bit back a laugh at the cacophony of throat noises coming over the phone and did my best to remain patient. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry, I can't seem to shake this winter bug. I imagine it's a warm, balmy day down there in Georgia, but up here it's frigid and windy." I recalled that Milton worked out of the Toronto office. He'd briefly tried New York City, but had retreated to his home country and an office overlooking Lake Ontario to appease both his new wife and his ulcer. He'd acquired Sylvia Morton, though, during his apprenticeship in the New York City offices when she was still an unknown writer, and had taken her with him to the affiliate office in Toronto. She'd proven to be his most prolific and most financially successful client over the years. Thanks in part to Sylvia and her numerous bestsellers, Milton's two daughters had both attended the best private schools as well as reputable universities. I sat up and gazed out Mother's bedroom window into her well-kept backyard oasis. From my perch on the edge of her bed, I could see right over the small writing desk that she'd strategically placed under the window, and I could understand why she preferred to do the bulk of her writing in here rather than at the larger and more impressive desk in her office across the hallway. The backyard view was a quiet and peaceful one, whereas her office window faced the short front yard and the street, which could be quite busy, depending upon the season. My mother was always one for quiet reflection. The television set and radio were never on if she were home alone, and I can still hear her heavy sighs when my brother and I would burst her Saturday morning solitude with our fights over which cartoon we were going to watch on TV while we ate our cereal. I'd become much like her in my later years, preferring a quiet house after the frenetic chaos of each nursing shift and its accompaniment of incessant beeping from hospital equipment. "Yes, it's a beautiful day down here," I told Milton. "I've been enjoying my stay here despite the reason for it. Once I get everything ready for the estate sale, it'll be hard to leave this island and go home." "Where's that?" he asked in a much clearer voice than before. "Iowa." I sighed. I'd always planned to retire near Mother. Savannah had so much charm, and I often admired its picturesque houses on my infrequent visits. I imagined myself the owner of a large old house surrounded by massive trees whose branches were draped abundantly with Spanish moss. Now, though, I'd probably end up staying in Des Moines forever, and that thought depressed me greatly. I rubbed my forehead. "Was there a reason for your call, Mr. Francis?" "Oh, please, you must call me Milton, or even Frank, like your mother always did. And yes, there is a reason." He paused, and I thought I heard a door creak shut on his end. "I'm wondering if you know what Sylvia did with the book she was writing. She was under contract for 2 more books, and I know, well, that is, she told me that she'd made considerable progress on one of the 2. "Oh?" I wasn't knowledgeable about anything Mother wrote, and I certainly wasn't informed about what she wrote as she wrote it. She never shared what she was writing with anyone, as far as I knew, and she especially didn't share it with family. The first I'd know of a new book was when that title appeared in bookstores, or if I took the effort to ask her, which I seldom did. I wasn't about to admit to Milton that I hadn't even read Mother's books. Just pieces here and there. Her novels were too dark for my liking, but I had read segments that she'd managed to publish as individual short stories in various magazines. Even those, though, stripped of the more sinister parts of the full stories, left me feeling cold and uncomfortable. So I avoided reading Mother's work for the most part. "She was writing a book when she died?" "Yes," he said, "but I hadn't read any of it yet. Sylvia was very secretive about her work until it was finished, but she always came through with great stuff. Last time we spoke, she assured me that I'd get the full book soon. She told me that it was almost complete." He paused, and I could hear him typing or loudly clicking his mouse. I stood and approached Mother's small desk, stretching the phone cord to its limit as I walked. Milton said, "We spoke on the 2nd. She, he trailed off. I nodded as I flipped through a notebook lying on her desk. Scanning it, I saw that the pages were filled with Mother's tiny scrawl, but it didn't seem to be any sort of cohesive story. Rather, it appeared to be a catch-all for her musings on everything from her flowers to her nightly strolls along the beach. I remained silent, so Milton finally finished his sentence. "She passed on the 5th, correct?" "Yes, the 5th. What was today?" I furrowed my brow in puzzlement. I wasn't sure what day of the week it was, let alone what the date was. Milton saved me from further embarrassment as he added, "So I realize she's only been gone 2 weeks, but I wanted to catch you while you were still at her house. I assume you've been sorting things?" I nodded, still flipping through the well-used notebook. It seemed to also contain story snippets or ideas for stories that now would never be written. Mother's handwriting blurred as I began to tear up. "Stacy, you still there?" I closed the notebook. "Yes, sorry, I'm still here." I went back to the bed and plopped down on the quilt again. "I don't know what to tell you about a book she was writing. She didn't share her writings with me either." He chuckled. "I'm sure she didn't. Most likely it's on her computer. Since she claimed to be nearly finished with it, that means she was typing it. So if you could check her computer files and get back to me if you happen to locate anything that looks like a work in progress, I'd appreciate it. Her readers would love to get one more Sylvia Morton book." I frowned. I suspected that Milton's real motivation for calling me was much more mercenary. After all, he'd profit greatly from one more bestseller as her agent, receiving 20% of Mother's earnings. He seemed to read my thoughts. "It's not about the money either. Well, not entirely. Besides, you and your brother would be the recipients of her earnings, past the advance she already received. Since the publisher paid her that in good faith due to her past performances, they're pushing me to deliver on a book to recoup that advance. So I'd like to read whatever she's written, even if it's not 100% complete." He'd piqued my interest. Any idea how much might come our way? Oh, hard to say for sure, but it could be well over 100,000, especially now that she's gone and won't be writing anymore. Her readers will want to buy this book. My mouth dropped open. $100,000? Yes, your mother is well known, and her books sell here as well as in other countries. In addition, you'll be seeing royalty payments for a long time to come from her other books too, and I suspect the publisher will want to print more editions of some of her older books. I slid from the edge of the bed to the floor. I'd expected to benefit a bit financially from her writings, but I had no idea the benefits could be that grand. My mind was reeling with the possibilities that now might open for me. I could retire early from nursing and move to Savannah after all. It wouldn't be the same without Mother nearby, but it would give me all the time I needed to sort through her years of accumulated mementos and assorted junk stored in the attic and packed throughout the small house. Mother owned the house, so I didn't need to worry about trying to keep up on a mortgage or rent. I'll see if I can get into her computer. I haven't even tried yet, to be honest with you. I don't know her password, so I haven't even bothered to turn it on. Oh, I believe I can help you with that. Her password is Bernard. What? I felt my mouth go dry. Bernard was my long-lost father, a man I hadn't seen or heard from since he walked out on us when I was 12. I know, it's strange. She told me, though, that it was the safest password she could imagine because no one would ever think of it. She only told me because she feared this very thing would happen to her someday. She confessed to me that her heart was weak, and she wanted me or someone she trusted to be able to get to any of her unpublished writings. She said that to continue to be published posthumously was the greatest achievement a writer could hope to attain. That sounded like something Mother would say, I had to admit. All right, Milton, I'll look on her computer, and if I find anything, I'll call you. He gave me his work and home numbers, and I jotted them onto the back of the notebook I'd taken from Mother's desk. After I hung up, I carried the phone back to her office and turned on her computer. It took a bit for it to reboot since it had been off for a while, but once the logon screen appeared against a large image of Tybee's beach at sunrise, I typed my father's name into the password box. It worked, and I found myself facing a screen that was filled with manuscript icons. Where was I to begin? Strategically, I decided. Many icons were titled, but others were not. Instead, they simply bore numbers. I clicked on the first one and started reading. The Attic and its Contents Forgotten Once Again. And thus ends Chapter 1 of Trouble on Tybee. I will share more chapters later, but this book is available in paperback form or as ebooks on Amazon. Thank you for listening.